Rate a director. This is where we take a director and look at his body of work, then make a list of all the good and bad films based on reviews and fan reactions. If the film is good, it gets a green check mark. If the movie's bad, then it gets a big red X. Then at the end, we tally up all the films and figure out if he's a good or bad director. Since it's October, I picked M. Night Shyamalan. Now I'm guessing that most people hate him and most of his movies, but he was once a great director who could tell a story on screen just by subtle camera movements, and with one of the most iconic movies of all time, with a twist ending that changed the game. So where did it all go wrong? Now I just want to point out that all this is opinion based. My list of the good and bad films at the end will probably be different than yours, and that's okay. I also gotta point out that I don't care about box office numbers. If a movie made 100 million but it sucked, then it gets a red X. Also, when a movie first came out and people hated it, but over time opinions changed and now people like it, then it gets a green check mark. So let's look at the 8 films he has directed. Let's start with 1999's The Sixth Sense. M. Night did direct 2 movies before this one in 1992 called Praying with Anger, and in 1998 called Wide Awake. But The Sixth Sense was his breakout film, his introduction. Now the movie stars Bruce Willis and Haley Joel Osment, and this movie has one of the greatest twist endings in movie history. Now M. Night was nominated for 2 Oscars for this movie, one for Best Director and one for Best Screenplay. Now I really like this movie, so it gets a check. But I've always been confused about one thing. If Bruce Willis is supposed to be dead, and he doesn't know he's dead, and the kid is the only one who can see him, then how did Willis manage to go to all those public places without interacting with anyone? Like when the kid would be talking to him in public, wouldn't people notice that Willis wasn't there? So who would the kid be talking to? Despite that, I still like the movie. Next came Unbreakable, starring Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson. Now Willis is a man with super strength, and Samuel L. Jackson is his arch nemesis who is super weak, with fragile bones. Now you gotta give M. Night credit about one thing. He tries to come up with different movie concepts, like really unique ones, even though later he turns out to be bad. But at least he tries. So M. Night was riding high off The Sixth Sense, so I guess people might have thought that this movie was going to be just as great, if not better. But at first I didn't like this movie, but over time I learned to appreciate it. It's one of his most underrated movies and one of my favorites of his. So it gets a check. Now real quick, below is the Rotten Tomatoes percentages and the IMDb ratings, just as a reference, but they're not set in stone. Next, in 2002, is Signs, starring Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix about an alien invasion. Now the camera work in the cupboard scene when the alien was stuck in the cupboard was genius, and it was so suspenseful. Also, the basement scene with the flashlight was one of my favorites. So I really like the movie. It gets a check. Now everybody always complains about the bad PG-13 twist ending with the horrible CGI alien, and I agree. But I don't think the last 15 minutes messes up the rest of the movie, which until that point was perfect. Next came The Village, starring Joaquin Phoenix, Adrian Brody, and Bryce Dallas Howard, all top-notch actors. Now this movie was considered M. Night's first real flop. I will say this, the concept and twist was really unique and intriguing, but badly executed. The dialogue was horrible and laughable in a bad way that just took me out of the movie. I tried really hard to give this movie a pass, but I just couldn't. It gets an X. Next came Lady in the Water, starring Bryce Dallas Howard and Paul Giamatti, based on some made-up kid's bedtime story. Now I made the mistake of seeing this movie in the theaters, and it was unwatchable, and the ending was anticlimactic. So sitting through the whole movie, bored, and nothing happened made it even worse. I remember M. Night explained after the movie came out how the twist ending was that there was no twist ending. That's when I started to hate him as a director and a storyteller. So it definitely gets an X. Then a few years later in 2008 came The Happening, starring Mark Wahlberg and Zoe Deschanel. Now this is another example of M. Night trying to think of a new, unique idea, but executing it poorly. I remember renting this movie from Blockbuster. Now it's about plants getting mad at people, and then they release toxic agents into the air, which makes people commit suicide. Now the opening scene where you see people jumping off the buildings to their death was the only good part about this whole movie. And Mark Wahlberg's dialogue was especially bad. What? No! And I don't even remember the twist ending. So it gets an X. Then in 2010 came The Last Airbender. Now I didn't see this movie, but I heard it was really bad in every sense of the word. Rotten Tomatoes even gave it a 6%. And it was loosely based on some cartoon that I never seen. And I remember the way they marketed this film was by not mentioning it was directed by M. Night. This was supposed to be his comeback film, but it didn't work, so it gets an X. Finally, his last film in 2013 was After Earth, starring Will Smith and his son, Jaden Smith. Now I blame at least half of this movie on Will Smith, because he is known for shoving his son down people's throats, like the Karate Kid remake, which was horrible. But I know why they remade it. This was supposed to be M. Night's second comeback film. And I think the only reason people gave him another chance was because it was Will Smith. Now the main thing I hated about this movie was the goofy accents. It was horrible. And they took it seriously, but it took me right out of the movie. So I had to give an X just on the goofy accents alone. So let's tally up all the movies. On the good side you have The Sixth Sense, Signs, and Unbreakable. And the movies that sucked, you have The Village, Lady in the Water, The Happening, The Last Airbender, and After Earth. So it's 3 good movies and 5 bad movies. That's a horrible resume. M. Night would need to come out with 2 great movies in a row just to break even. He's supposed to be directing a new movie in 2015 called Wayward Pines, but I don't think it's gonna help him. So what went wrong? Maybe it was our fault for putting him on such a high pedestal after The Sixth Sense. Then he just couldn't deliver afterwards and he ran out of ideas. Or he got too big for his own good and thought every and any movie idea he had was genius and nobody could tell him no. So my rating for M. Night Shyamalan is an F. Maybe an F plus. So that was Rated Director. Let me know in the comments below what director I should rate next. Also, what M. Night movie do you like and which ones do you hate? And how do you rate him as a director?